I am speaking from a satellite uplink facility outside Avezzano, in the Abruzzo Mountains, in Italy. If you know the area, you know the roads that snake between low hills and the wider valley. You know the cold air at night that sits still, and the way the town lights look small when you climb into the service roads near the dishes. This place is supposed to feel boring. It is fences, cameras, badge readers, concrete halls, white radomes, and air that smells of dust filters and electronics that never fully cool down. My name does not matter. I am a civilian translator. I get hired because people in uniforms and people in suits need someone who can listen to messy human speech and turn it into clean meaning. Most days I translate recordings. Sometimes I translate live when someone panics and starts speaking without thinking. I am not an analyst. I am not a soldier. I am not supposed to be the person talking to you right now. This is not an official broadcast. No agency approved it. Nobody asked me to do it. I am doing it because the command staff ran out of the building. The uplink chain stayed powered, and the silence felt worse than any risk I could name out loud. If you are hearing me, you have some kind of receiver and some kind of patience. Keep both. I am going to avoid names of channels and frequencies. I'm going to avoid telling you anything that helps anyone hurt anyone. I am not giving routes. I am not giving coordinates. I am not giving target information. What I am doing is translating what leaks out when coordination breaks and people start talking on whatever still works. I am translating the part of a war that governments cannot fully control, the human layer. You already know the big fact. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization and Russia have collapsed into open war. Not the slow kind, with proxy disclaimers and careful language. The kind where aircraft are falling, ships are burning, and cities that thought they were rear are suddenly dealing with power cuts and emergency sirens. The kind where every rumor becomes a weapon because nobody knows what is true fast enough. I'm going to tell you how today started for me, because the beginning matters. The beginning shows you how thin the wall was between tense politics and what we have now. Yesterday I left this facility after a normal shift. Normal means a little extra security, a few extra faces, and a quiet sense that something is building. You get used to that. People who work around government contracts live in a constant low-grade pressure. You learn to ignore it, or you lose your mind. I drove down into Avezzano. I bought bread and canned tomatoes. I ate in my kitchen with the television on low and my phone in my hand, refreshing news without admitting I was doing it. I tried to sleep early. I slept in short pieces, waking up from the sound of nothing. That silent wake-up you get when your body decides it is not safe even though your room is quiet. At around 5:40 in the morning, I gave up. I showered, put on clean clothes, and packed my bag as if it was a normal workday. Laptop, headphones, small notebook, charging cable. Then I added 2 bottles of water and a protein bar because I had a bad feeling and because I hate myself when I ignore bad feelings. The drive up to the facility felt wrong. Not dramatic, just wrong. No music on the radio, only talk. And the talk was too careful. A presenter kept repeating unconfirmed reports and security sources, and you could hear that they were reading lines they did not fully believe. Traffic was light, but the few cars I saw were moving fast and staying far apart, as if nobody wanted to be trapped behind anyone else. At the gate, a security guard I know, Marco, was not joking the way he usually does. He scanned my badge once, then again, then looked at the screen like the screen was lying to him. His face was gray, and his eyes were dry. He told me to park close to the main building, not in the outer lot. When I asked why, he just said the words, "Stay inside today," and he did not say anything else. Inside, the building smelled the same as always. Filtered air, electronics, coffee that has been on a warmer too long. That normal smell should have calmed me. It did not, because the people did not smell normal. People smelled of sweat and cold air. People walked fast. Nobody lingered. The hallway chatter was low and sharp. Short sentences, half-finished thoughts. By 6:30, I was at my desk with headphones on. The task queue was already full, and that almost never happens. When it does happen, it is because something broke and everyone is scrambling, not because the world is ending. This time the tags on the audio clip said emergency, priority, immediate translation. Different sources, different formats. Some clean, some distorted. Some obviously grabbed from places that are not supposed to be open. I clicked the first live feed they routed to me. It was Russian, not polished, not a spokesperson. It was a young man breathing hard, voice cracking, trying to keep his words inside procedure. He was asking for confirmation of a target picture because their radar picture was inconsistent. He was saying they had missiles in the air and they did not know if the corridor was clear. Another voice answered him with anger and authority, telling him to launch and stop asking. A third voice cut in, lower and more controlled, saying command was not answering at all. That exchange did something to me because it was not ideology. It was not propaganda. It was technical fear. It was the sound of someone realizing they were about to kill the wrong thing and not being allowed to slow down. That is the part that breaks discipline. When a person knows a mistake is coming and has no power to stop it, they either freeze or they lash out. I took the headphones off, stared at my screen, and listened to the room. Other translators were working too. I could hear English fragments from a booth to my left, Polish in another, German in another. Nobody was talking to each other. Everyone was locked in their own channel, doing their small job while the big machine shook around us. At around 7:15, a supervisor called everyone into the corridor. He used the phrase continuity posture and tried to sound calm. He said non-essential staff would be released. He said essential support staff would stay. He looked down at a printed list and started reading names. He got through maybe 8 names before his phone rang. He answered the call. His face changed. That is the only way I can describe it. His eyes widened. His jaw tightened, and he stopped trying to manage our emotions. He hung up and told everyone who was not on the list to leave immediately. He said not to argue. He said take what you need. He said do not stop at your desk if your desk is far. Then he repeated it again, louder, and then he ran. People began moving toward exits. It was not screaming panic. It was fast, controlled fear. The kind you see when adults realize the rules are gone, but they still want to pretend they are professionals. A woman from accounting was crying while she walked. A contractor from maintenance had his phone pressed to his ear, saying his child's name over and over as if saying it enough times could make the line connect. I should have left. That is the part I want to be honest about. Any sensible person leaves when the building staff evacuates. I did not. I stayed because I could see what was still powered in the equipment status screens. I could see the uplink chain still locked. I could see traffic still passing through. I could also see the queue of live intercepts growing. And I knew that if no one translated them, the only people who would hear the raw truth would be the people already making decisions with guns. There is a moment when you realize you are about to do something that might ruin your life. It is not cinematic. It is not brave. It is just a quiet moment where you take a breath and decide you would rather live with consequences than live with having done nothing. That is what happened. I walked past the empty desks and into a section of the facility where the broadcast and uplink control rooms are. This building is designed with layers. Public lobby, contractor offices, secure corridors, then the rooms with racks and monitoring stations where the air is colder and the doors shut heavier. I used my badge. It still worked. I used my code. It still worked. That told me nobody had formally locked the building down. They had just abandoned it. In one control room, screens showed the satellite carriers and link quality. Some were stable. Some were spiking. The noise floor was higher than it should be. That told me interference was happening somewhere, either deliberate or from systems under stress. I heard the faint whine of cooling fans and the deeper hum of power supplies. Everything sounded normal, which is what made it feel worse. The machines were calm, humans were not. I found the small studio that normally handles internal announcements and contracted audio feeds. Not a glamorous studio, a desk, A microphone, a mixing board, monitors, a control computer, and patch panels that route audio into different chains. I am not a hacker. I did not break in. My badge lets me enter because part of my job is to translate in real time when needed. The emergency posture had left several routes armed and active. Someone had already patched emergency traffic through, and they left it that way when they fled. I put on studio headphones. I checked the microphone. I watched the levels bounce when I breathed. I took a moment and did the most boring thing that kept me from shaking. I wrote down what I was going to say in the first 10 seconds. Not a speech, just a grounding line. Where I am, what this is, what it is not. Then I opened the route. My voice went out on a path meant for something else. That is the truth. This is not heroic. It is a failure of procedure during a global crisis. If you are hearing me, you are hearing a civilian translator sitting in an empty facility, speaking into a microphone because the people in charge decided silence was safer than honesty. Maybe they are right. Silence reduces panic. Silence also leaves room for lies to fill the air. I chose the risk of truth. The first hour after I opened the mic was mostly of me listening and translating in bursts because the intercepts were coming in too fast. I heard English air coordination chatter, Russian ground unit calls, Polish emergency management warnings, and something that sounded Scandinavian, calm but urgent, talking about airspace closure and diversion of civilian flights. I heard the language of emergency checklists. I heard voices reading from cards. I also heard voices that were not reading anything, voices that were trying to survive. Here is what I can say with confidence based on repeated fragments from different sources. The opening strikes and counterstrikes have hit not only military targets. They have hit power infrastructure. They have hit communications nodes. They have hit logistics hubs. That is why everything feels scattered. It is not only because people are panicking, it is because the systems that hold modern coordination together are being damaged on purpose. You do not need me to tell you what happens when power fails. Lights go out, pumps stop, elevators stall. Phones die when towers lose backup. Hospitals switch to generator and start rationing. Fuel stations stop pumping. Payment terminals fail. Then people do what people always do. They try to fix their own problem first, and that means lines, crowds, fights, and accidents. I heard a German civilian dispatcher on an emergency net telling people to conserve water because the treatment plant was losing pressure. Minutes later, another voice, also German, cut in and said the message was outdated because the treatment plant had taken a hit and was offline. They argued on the air for a few seconds, not as enemies, as co-workers, trying to decide what truth to broadcast when they did not fully know it. That is what collapse looks like at the civic level. Not flames in the street first, but uncertainty that spreads faster than any official correction. From the eastern side, I heard Polish voices describing overloaded roads, and then describing roads that went quiet suddenly because traffic stopped moving at all. I heard one voice say a bridge was closed, then another voice say the bridge was gone. I cannot verify which bridge. I am not giving details. I am telling you the pattern. Transport links are being attacked or overwhelmed. When a corridor dies, everything behind it becomes trapped, including ambulances and supply convoys. On Russian channels, I heard something that chilled me because it was internal, not battlefield. A woman asked if the metro was closing in her city. A man answered that it was already closed and told her to stay away from windows. Then he told her to boil water when she could. That tells me cities are being hit. People in apartments are being told to act as if airstrikes are possible. That is not a limited operation. That is a society being shoved into wartime posture overnight. On an English military net, I heard an air controller tell pilots to hold because identification was uncertain. The pilot answered in a controlled voice that had anger under it. He said he had seen a launch plume earlier. He said his fuel state was low. He said he had fast-moving tracks closing and he could not hold forever. The controller repeated the hold instruction. Then a different voice, not clearly in the same chain, said a phrase that meant the checks were being relaxed. It was not a formal authorization from a calm authority. It was someone saying it in a way that sounded rushed. The pilot acknowledged, then used a code word that indicated a missile launch. That is as far as I will take it. What matters is not the code word. What matters is that the loop was not clean. Orders are supposed to come from defined points. When you hear unauthorized or unclear authorization, you are hearing a chain that is cracking. A little later, I heard Russian voices shouting about aircraft down in the water. Then another voice said the aircraft was theirs. That was followed by silence, then a cold voice telling everyone to stop talking and switch to another net. The panic leaked anyway. Once panic leaks, you cannot put it back in the bottle. You might be thinking, why can I hear any of this? Because war breaks discipline. Because jamming pushes people onto backup channels. Because cyber attacks break encryption or break equipment that supports it. Because people grab old radios and yell for help. Because some units still use civilian infrastructure at the edges. Because some commanders decide speed matters more than security for 10 minutes, and in that 10 minutes, the world listens. I am also seeing things in the technical layer here. The spectrum monitors show bursts of noise that match deliberate interference, not random static. Link quality is bouncing on carriers that should be rock solid. That means either the ground station on the other end is being hit, or someone is stepping on the uplink, or the satellites are being affected by interference, or power stability is degrading. This is not a single clean failure. It is multiple overlapping failures. At around 1300 local time, the building lights dipped hard enough that my monitors flickered. The uninterruptible power supply units kicked in with a clicking sound, then the generator engaged. You can feel it when a generator takes load. The hum changes, the floor vibration changes. I walked into the utility room and checked the fuel gauge. It was a little above half. That is not comforting. Half is a countdown. I went back to the studio and kept talking. Because the moment the power began to wobble, I understood something simple. If this facility goes dark, a lot of traffic dies with it, and then the only narratives left will be official speeches and rumors. I am not saying my voice is important. I am saying any independent voice becomes important when official systems start hiding from their own citizens. Here is where the plot of my day gets more dangerous, because I am not alone in this valley and signals spread fast. At about 2:30, I heard the first distant sirens from the town. Not the quick ambulance siren, the longer civil defense sound. It carried up the hill in a way that made it feel closer than it was. I checked my phone. No new alerts came through. I refreshed news apps. Some loaded, some did not. A friend in Rome texted a single sentence. Metro closing early, police everywhere. Then nothing. A little after that, I heard a helicopter. Low, heavy, moving fast. That is not normal here. Tourists do not fly that low over these hills. It passed and did not come back. In my headphones, I caught a fragment mentioning Wiesbaden in Germany and another mentioning Rzeszów in Poland. Those are not random. Those are logistics and command nodes. The context around both sounded strained. People were saying those nodes were not responding. That tells you either they are relocating, they are jammed, or they are damaged. Any of those options means confusion. Then, around 3-something, I got the first local problem. The security system chirped, not a full alarm, just a door sensor notification. An exterior service door on the lower side had opened. I killed my microphone output for a moment, not because I wanted secrecy, but because I needed to hear. I heard 2 male voices in Italian, close enough that they were inside the corridor, arguing in fast whispers. One man said he heard a voice coming from the satellite place, and he wanted information. The other man said they should leave because the military might show up and they would get arrested or worse. They did not sound violent. They sounded scared and excited, the way people sound when something unreal becomes real and they want proof with their own eyes. I stayed silent. I kept my back against the studio door and listened to them move down the hallway. They tried another door. It was locked. They tried the handle again. They swore. They walked away. A minute later, I heard the exterior door close. Then the sensor chirped again. Then quiet. That moment mattered because it told me I was now a local target, not in a military sense, in a human sense. People chase information. People chase any place that still has power. People chase rumor. If enough desperate people decide this facility is a shelter, they will come. If armed men decide the same, they will come too. I made a decision right then that shaped everything after. I left the studio and walked through the building and locked interior doors that I normally would never touch. I moved a heavy metal cabinet against one corridor entrance, not as a fortress, as a delay. I turned off most lights to reduce visibility from outside. I kept only what I needed. Studio, one monitoring station, one utility corridor to reach the generator room. Then I did something that felt cruel but was necessary. I turned off the exterior intercom and door buzzer. If someone came, I did not want a constant ringing that would distract me or attract more people. Back on the air, I told anyone listening the truth. Do not come here. Do not move toward broadcast sources. Do not create crowds. If you can hear, stay where you are and coordinate quietly. I said it again and again because I could already imagine a line of cars climbing the access road, and then a confrontation, and then shots, and then this building becoming a story about blood instead of a story about information. After that, the war in my headphones escalated in a way I did not expect, not because the weapons were surprising, but because the civic fabric began tearing openly. I heard Russian civilian emergency calls talking about water pressure failing and people fighting at supermarkets. I heard a Polish municipal voice telling people to stay indoors because there was debris falling after an interception. Then another voice warning that the debris had started small fires on rooftops. I heard a Scandinavian voice warning of fuel rationing. I heard English-speaking logistics units saying rail movement was suspended, and they had to move by road. Then another voice saying the road corridors were not safe. At one point on an English net, I heard a phrase that made my stomach drop. Unknown treated as hostile until further notice. It was said in a clean way, like a line on a checklist. That is the type of rule that gets civilians killed. Because civilians become unknown the moment systems fail. A transponder that stops transmitting, a truck that turns without permission, a convoy that misses a checkpoint because the checkpoint no longer exists, all of that becomes unknown. On a Russian net, I heard the mirror version. A commander said they would follow the last confirmed order because new orders might be false. That sounds sensible until you realize the last confirmed order might no longer match reality. Stale orders plus fear equals mistakes. I also heard repeated mentions of drones in multiple languages. Not hobby drones. Military drones used for reconnaissance and attack. That matters because drones make the battlefield more confusing for civilians too. People hear a buzzing, see a small shape, and they do not know if it is watching, if it is armed, if it is friendly, if it is hostile. When people do not know, they shoot at shadows, and stray bullets hit neighbors. Around 4:40, my phone briefly connected again. I got one message from my mother. One. It said she was alive and she was staying away from windows. That was it. Then the network died again. I stared at that message until my eyes hurt. I did not cry because I did not have the luxury. I wrote her name in my notebook, and under it I wrote the time, because I needed something physical to hold on to. I told you earlier I would not feed ideology. I am sticking to that. But I will challenge something that is going to happen in your head if you are listening long enough. You are going to want a clean villain and a clean hero because it is easier to survive emotionally if you can sort the world into simple boxes. That urge is normal. It is also dangerous because it makes you accept lies that match your box and reject truths that do not. Right now, the most important thing is not your loyalty to a narrative. It is your loyalty to reality. Reality is this: coordination is breaking down. Units are firing without clear authorization. Civil infrastructure is being hit or is failing under strain. Emergency information is inconsistent. People are moving, and when people move in fear, accidents multiply. Here is an example of inconsistency that could kill thousands. I intercepted two separate civil defense-style messages in different languages that both referenced evacuation corridors opening. One sounded official, the other sounded rushed. The problem was, both referenced corridors that, based on other traffic, were already under threat or already closed. That means either the messages were outdated, or they were deliberate misinformation, or the local authorities were lying to reduce panic. Any of those options can funnel civilians into danger. So I made another decision. I stopped repeating any evacuation instruction unless I could confirm it from at least two different independent sources inside the intercept flow. That made my broadcast less dramatic and more boring. And boring is good because boring means fewer people get lured into a trap by my words. Now I am going to describe the first catastrophe I could feel through the building, not just hear in my headphones. At 5:20 something, the whole facility shuddered lightly. Not an earthquake, more like a pressure change. A second later, the generator load jumped and the air handling system changed pitch. That can happen when grid conditions swing hard. It can also happen when there is a large disturbance in the region. I ran to the control room window and looked toward the valley. I did not see smoke. I did see a faint flash far off, low on the horizon, then nothing. It might have been a transformer fire. It might have been something else. I cannot confirm. The important part is the power quality degraded immediately after. The uninterruptible power supply units began beeping warnings in a slow pattern that means stress. I checked the battery status. They were healthy but not infinite. If the generator fails, the entire chain dies. That includes my voice. So I did what you do when you are alone, and you do not have a team. I simplified. I shut down every non-essential monitor. I powered off lighting panels and unused corridors. I unplugged a coffee machine because I could not stand the idea of losing the broadcast because some idiot appliance spiked the load at the wrong moment. I kept the studio chain, one monitoring station, and the uplink control computer alive. Everything else became expendable. That is a real decision under real constraints. You cannot keep every comfort. You keep what matters and you accept that life shrinks. The next wave of intercepts came through heavier, louder, more chaotic. That tells me the situation on the ground was worsening. I heard English voices talking about air defense saturation, meaning too many inbound objects to intercept cleanly. I heard Russian voices swearing and then forcing themselves back into procedure, which is what people do when they are close to losing control. I heard Polish calls for medical evacuation, and I heard the replies. No corridor, no fuel, no rotorcraft available, too much air threat. One fragment hit me hard because it was about civilians directly. An English-speaking unit warned to hold fire because they believed a civilian convoy was in the area. Another voice answered that convoys were being used as cover. Then the first voice repeated the hold instruction. Then the second voice said it was too late. I will not describe what too late means in detail. You already know. This is the point where the war stops being something you watch and becomes something you breathe. Not because it reached Italy with bombs, but because it reached Italy with fear and breakdown. At around 6:40, my phone received an emergency alert in Italian. It was short and vague. It told people to limit travel and follow official information sources. It did not mention the war directly. That vagueness is its own message. Governments avoid direct statements when they fear the public reaction. That can be sensible. It can also be denial. 10 minutes after that, local sirens in Avezzano sounded again. Then they stopped. Then they sounded again. That pattern can indicate tests, or it can indicate indecision, or it can indicate a system being manually triggered and then shut off because someone upstairs is arguing about panic. I was still on the air when the second local intrusion happened, and this one changed the story from a lone translator into something uglier. The exterior camera monitor lit up with movement on the access road. Headlights climbing. 2 cars. Then 3. Then a small van. They parked near the lower gate. People got out. I could see their silhouettes through the camera's low light grain. They were not soldiers. They were locals. At least 8 people. One of them had a flashlight. One of them had what looked like a long object, possibly a tool. It could have been a shotgun. I could not tell. They walked to the gate and looked up toward the building. The flashlight beam swung across the fence, across the sign, across the camera. Then the beam pointed directly into the lens, and the camera view flared white. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Not because I thought they were going to kill me, because I knew what crowds do under stress. They might beg. They might demand. They might try to force entry. If I let them in, I become responsible for them and for whatever comes with them. If I do not let them in, I become the man who shut the door on frightened neighbors during a national emergency. I muted my mic again for a few seconds and moved fast. I checked the internal door locks. I grabbed the only thing I could use as a weapon, which was not a gun, just a heavy metal tool from a maintenance cabinet. I hate that. I hate that I had to do it. I did it anyway. Then I made a third decision, and this one was the hardest so far. I did not open the door. I did not speak through the intercom. I watched them on the camera and waited to see what kind of people they were. Two of them walked along the fence line, looking for a weak point. One stood back with arms crossed, scanning the building. One woman sat on the curb and put her head in her hands. A child stood close to her, holding her sleeve. That detail made my stomach twist, because a child does not belong in a parking lot outside a secure facility during a war escalation. They tried the lower service door. It held. They knocked. They knocked again. They shouted in Italian. They said they could hear the voice. They said they needed shelter because rumors were spreading that nearby infrastructure could be targeted. They said the town was already having fights at fuel stations. They said they could not get through to family. They asked if anyone was inside. I did not answer at first. I stood behind a locked door listening, feeling my own shame and fear mixing together. I knew one more truth too. If I opened for them, word would spread. More would come. Some would be decent, some would be dangerous. In a crisis, you do not get to choose who arrives next. I stayed still long enough to hear the rhythm of their breathing through the metal, the way they shifted their weight, the scrape of shoes on concrete. One of them kept whispering, "He is in there," over and over, as if repeating it could force the door to become less real. Somebody knocked again, slower this time, trying to sound polite. Then the polite tone snapped and turned into a demand. I heard the child start crying. A thin, tired sound, not a tantrum, more the sound of a kid who has been told to be quiet too many times in one day. I backed away from the door and went to the camera monitor. The lower gate area was crowded now. The first group had called others, or people had followed their cars up the access road. I counted at least 14, maybe more, because the camera angle clipped the far edge of the lot. A few had backpacks. One had a small suitcase on wheels, which told me they did not come just to ask questions. They came to stay. From the way they moved, I could tell they were not organized. They were neighbors and cousins and whoever still answered the phone. They kept pointing up at the dishes and the radomes, arguing about what the place actually was. One man made a sweeping gesture with both arms and said something that sounded confident, and everyone else listened, which made me hate him immediately because confidence spreads faster than facts. I looked at my notebook on the desk. I had written earlier that this building would become a local target. Seeing the crowd grow made the warning feel physical. I could not manage them. I could not feed them. I could not protect them if anything came down the access road with weapons. If I opened the door, I was signing up to become a shelter manager in the middle of a war escalation, with no staff and no authority, and a transmitter that would attract attention. I heard more audio in my headphones while I watched the camera. Russian voices, sharp and clipped, arguing about a bridge crossing and a stalled column. English voices, air domain, talking about degraded identification and a temporary hold on all civilian air traffic in multiple regions. A Polish voice on a civil net warning about power rationing and advising people to fill bathtubs while water pressure still existed. That last part made my jaw tighten because it was the exact kind of advice that turns a neighborhood into a mess, when everyone hears it at the same time. I turned my microphone on and spoke to the air, not to the door. I kept it blunt. I told anyone listening locally to stop coming here. I said this facility is not staffed. I said there is no shelter inside. I said go back to town and get indoors. Pick one building, stay quiet, conserve water, keep kids calm, do not clog the road. I did not dress it up. I did not try to sound kind. Kindness can sound negotiable. And right then I needed them to hear a closed door in my voice. Then I shut the mic and walked back to the door, and I spoke through the metal without opening it. I told them I could not let anyone in. I told them the building was secure and alarms would bring authorities. And if authorities came, the crowd would be treated as a threat. That was partly a guess, partly a warning based on how these situations go. I heard angry replies. I heard someone call me a coward. I heard someone else tell that man to shut up because yelling does not cut steel. The woman with the child sat down again, and the child leaned against her shoulder. That image got under my skin. I have no children. Still, you do not need to be a parent to know what it means when a kid stops asking questions and just waits. I did the small compromise I could live with. I found bottled water in a storage room, grabbed 6 bottles, went to the fence-side corridor, and slid the bottles through the lower gap of the gate without stepping outside. I shouted for them to take the water and leave. They grabbed it fast. The child hugged one bottle tight. Nobody moved after that. They stood there, still not leaving, still hoping. That hope turned into bargaining. One of the men lifted the bottle and yelled up toward the camera, "We will not take anything, just let the child in." Another shouted, "We can work, we can guard, we can clean." A third tried a softer approach, calling me brother, telling me he understood fear, telling me this was a Christian thing, that we had to help each other. I am not proud of what I felt. I felt anger, not at them for being desperate, at the situation for turning basic decency into a trap. While they argued outside, my screens inside began flashing warnings I could not ignore. Link quality was dipping hard on a set of carriers that were usually stable. The spectrum noise floor jumped and stayed elevated. That is not normal interference. That is either deliberate jamming, someone uplinking garbage, or a fault in the chain. A few seconds later, the monitoring station logged a burst transmission from a source tagged as priority government relay. The audio came through distorted, but the structure was clear. Someone higher up was issuing a shutdown instruction to multiple nodes, telling facilities to go dark or switch to hardened mode. That was the moment I realized my little broadcast had a countdown. Either someone would shut this chain down remotely or someone would show up in person to do it. I made a decision fast. I stopped trying to keep the broadcast continuous as a single open stream. Instead, I began recording my own voice and the key intercept fragments onto local storage in the control computer, then pushing it out in shorter bursts when the link stabilized for a moment. That way, if the chain got killed mid-sentence, at least some of what I had already translated would still have gone out. It felt ugly, broken, and real, because the world was becoming that too. Outside, the crowd shifted again. 2 men walked away from the group and moved along the fence line toward a section where the terrain dropped slightly. I watched them on the camera, my stomach tightening. One carried a tool, a bolt cutter or heavy pliers. The other carried a long metal bar. That was not bargaining anymore. That was a test. I cut my mic, grabbed the heavy tool from the maintenance cabinet again, and moved to an interior corridor that overlooks a side window. I did not open any doors. I just positioned myself where I could hear if the fence started to rattle or if glass broke. I hated the feeling of waiting, because waiting makes you imagine every outcome. They started cutting at something. I could hear it faintly through the building, the dry metallic bite of tool on metal, repeated, stubborn. Then a shout from the main group, someone telling them to stop. Another voice answered, "If he will not open, we open." Then the cutting continued. At the same time, my headphones brought in a different kind of noise. A burst of automated tones and clipped voice prompts that sounded like air raid alert traffic from farther east. Then an English voice, strained, saying a port facility had taken a hit and there was fire on fuel storage. They were trying to coordinate firefighters while also warning about secondary explosions. I am not giving the port name. You do not need it. The fact is enough. Critical infrastructure is burning, and people are still trying to use radios to do their jobs inside the damage. Then I heard Italian on an emergency network, not local to this facility, but within reach of the same relay ecosystem. The voice was official, calm, and tired. It said there were temporary restrictions on road movement in certain corridors and requested that civilians remain off major highways unless necessary. It also mentioned disruptions in payment systems and urged people to carry identification and any required medicines. That message was carefully written to sound normal. It still carried the sharp smell of fear underneath it. I went back to the studio, turned the mic on, and I told the truth again in simple words. I said the link is unstable and may be shut down. I said if you have family, send short messages. Do not waste battery on scrolling. Keep water. Keep warm clothing ready. Stay away from windows if you hear impacts. And do not travel toward any facility with antennas or towers. I emphasized the last part because I could see my own problem growing outside the gate. The fence cutters made progress. I saw the mesh flex and then give slightly. It was not an open hole yet, but it was enough that one man tested it with his shoulder. The fence held, but the gate area was designed to keep honest people out, not a determined group with tools. I had to choose between two bad options. Option 1. Continue broadcasting and risk the crowd forcing entry while my attention is split. Option 2. Stop broadcasting, focus on securing the building, and lose the only thing I believed was useful about me today. I chose a third option that felt cruel and practical. I turned the outside floodlights on for 5 seconds, then off again. Just a flash, bright enough that everyone outside looked up and froze. Then I turned on the exterior loudspeaker system, the one used for safety drills, and I spoke into it from inside without opening anything. I told them to stop cutting immediately. I told them the area was monitored and any breach would be treated as sabotage. I told them to leave now. I used a harder tone than I wanted because soft voices get ignored when crowds are hungry and scared. It worked for a moment. The cutters stepped back. The main group surged forward, yelling at them, yelling at me, yelling at each other. A woman shouted that there was a child. A man shouted that this place had food and power, and they were not leaving. Another man shouted that police would come and everyone would be arrested. The argument turned into pushing. I saw two men grab each other's jackets. Then the camera view shook slightly because someone bumped the fence pole. I backed away from the monitor and took a breath through my nose, forcing my hands to stop trembling. I hate that my body reacts this way. I have listened to war audio before without shaking. This was different because it was my doorstep. I heard a new sound then, and it was the sound that changed everything. A vehicle climbing the access road fast, engine under load, tires biting gravel. Not a small car, heavier. The sound got louder, then brakes, then a hard stop. The crowd turned. Heads snapped toward the road. On the camera, two dark vehicles entered the lower lot. Military style, not civilian. One had a light bar that was off. The other had no markings I could see in the grainy night mode. 4 people got out quickly, moving in a way that was not panicked. That was trained movement. They wore helmets. They carried rifles. They did not wave them around, but they held them ready. The crowd reacted in a way that made me cold inside. Half of them stepped back immediately. The other half stepped forward, hands raised, shouting over each other, trying to explain, trying to plead. The armed men did not rush. One of them pointed to the road and made a clear gesture to move back. Another kept his eyes on the cutters near the fence line. A third spoke into a shoulder microphone. I could not hear the words through the camera, but I did not need to. The posture said enough. This is the part where people who have never been in a tense crowd imagine a clean resolution. There is no clean resolution. There is only momentum and fear and misunderstandings. One man from the crowd did something stupid. He took 2 quick steps toward the armed group, palms up, talking fast. One of the armed men lifted his rifle slightly, not aiming at the man's head, aiming at center mass because that is training. The man froze. Then he kept talking. Then the armed man shouted something and shoved him back with a firm, open hand. The man stumbled and fell onto the curb. The child screamed. The woman grabbed the child and tried to pull him behind her legs. I stood inside a secure building and felt helpless, because at that distance my choices were gone. If I opened the door, I would make myself part of that confrontation. If I stayed silent, I was already part of it anyway, because the only reason they came was the broadcast. I turned my microphone on and spoke in a low voice, more to steady myself than to be heard. I said there were armed responders at the gate and civilians should back off. I said, do not approach. I said, if you are in this valley, stay indoors. I did not add drama. I did not add fear words. I just said what my eyes were seeing. The armed men began pushing the crowd away from the fence, not violently but with force. Two civilians tried to argue. One of the armed men pointed at the cut section of fence and then pointed down toward the road again. That was a clear accusation, attempted breach. Then something happened that I did not expect. One of the armed men looked up toward the building and pointed toward the camera. He knew exactly where it was. He spoke into his shoulder mic again, and then he moved toward the building's lower service entrance with two others behind him. They did not run. They walked fast and controlled. I killed my mic. I grabbed my notebook, my phone, my water, and the heavy tool. I moved deeper into the building toward the inner secure corridor where the studio and uplink control are. I did not hide in a closet. I positioned myself where I could speak through a closed door without being seen. If they were here to shut me down, hiding would not help. If they were here to arrest someone, hiding might get me shot by mistake. I chose visibility with barriers. Footsteps, heavy boots, a knock on a steel door that was not a request. The door handle rattled. A voice shouted in Italian, "Open, security." Another voice, calmer, said, "We know you are inside." The tone was not angry, it was tired. That scared me more than anger. I answered through the door. "I am unarmed. I am a civilian." My voice sounded thin to my own ears. I told them again I was unarmed. I told them I could not open without a clear instruction because I did not know who they were. That was partly true. Mostly it was me buying time. They responded with something that confirmed they were official, at least official enough to know details. They used my name, not my first name, my full name. They said it once, correctly. That meant they had a list, or they had access to personnel records, or someone told them. They told me to open because they needed to secure the uplink. I took a breath, then I did the only realistic thing. I opened the door, but I opened it in a controlled way, keeping myself visible and keeping my hands out. Two men entered first, rifles held low, but ready. They checked corners, scanned the hallway, then one of them looked at me and said, "You are the one broadcasting." It was not a question. I nodded. I told them I was translating what I was hearing. I told them the building had been abandoned and the chain was still live. I told them civilians were gathering because they heard the signal. I told them the fence was being cut. I did not argue about morality. I stuck to facts. One of them swore under his breath. Not at me, at the situation. He told the other to lock the door behind them. The third man walked past me toward the studio area with the confidence of someone who knows the layout. That told me they had been briefed on this facility before they arrived. The man who spoke to me kept his voice low. He said there was a directive to reduce emissions from non-essential nodes because there were credible reports of targeting of communications infrastructure across Europe. He said this place could become a target if it stayed loud. He said the crowd outside made it worse. He looked me in the eye and said, "Do you understand what you did?" I did not give him a speech. I said yes. Then I said the next part. Because it was also true. I said silence would not protect civilians from rumor. I said I had heard multiple conflicting evacuation instructions in different nets, and people were already moving in panic. I said if official channels were going dark, someone had to tell people to stay calm and stay home. I said it fast, trying to keep my emotions from turning into pleading. He stared at me for a second and then said, "We are not here to debate." He told me they were going to shut down my route. He told me I would come with them, at least to be identified and debriefed, because my broadcast might have been picked up by actors they did not want listening. He did not say Russia out loud. He did not have to. Then the building shook again, harder this time, enough that a ceiling panel rattled. The men froze, listening. A second later, the power dipped. The uninterruptible power supply units chirped. The generator kicked harder. The lights flickered and held. The armed man's face changed slightly. He reached to his shoulder radio and spoke fast. The other man, the one heading toward the studio, shouted back from down the corridor that the uplink control screens were showing massive interference and that the link was degrading. Outside, on the camera feed, I saw something worse than the crowd. I saw the horizon in the direction of the main power corridor glow dull orange for a moment, then dim. That looked like a transformer station fire, the kind that lights the low clouds and then dies when breakers trip. If that was what it was, the valley was about to have a long night. The armed man looked back at me and made a decision in real time, and I respected it even though it scared me. He said, "If the grid is going unstable, we do not move you. We secure this building and we keep control." He told his team to clear the lower entrance and push the crowd out fully. He told the man in the studio corridor to stop trying to shut it down for a moment and instead stabilize power and lock the emission profile down to the minimum needed. That meant my broadcast might stay alive, but only as long as they allowed it, and only if the building stayed powered. He turned to me and said, "You are going to sit in that studio and you are going to say one thing clearly." He told me to tell people to go home. He told me to tell them the facility is under security control and anyone approaching will be detained. He told me to stop translating military traffic immediately. He said I could broadcast general civil safety information only, nothing operational, nothing from intercepts. He said if I did not agree, he would cut the mic himself. I want to be honest with you. A part of me wanted to fight him on it. Another part of me knew he was right about one piece. Translating raw, battlefield chatter in real time could get people killed if the wrong ears used it. I had been careful, but careful is not perfect, and war punishes imperfection. So I agreed, and I made my own condition in my head that I did not say out loud. I would stop translating tactical fragments. I would keep describing the collapse patterns and the civic consequences because civilians deserve to know what is happening to the systems they depend on. I went back into the studio with the armed man standing behind me in the doorway. I turned the microphone on. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I told the crowd outside to leave immediately. I told anyone listening locally to stay away. I told them there was security on site and they would be detained if they tried to breach. I told them to return to town and shelter indoors. I repeated it 3 times, using plain Italian, then plain English, because panic makes people understand only the simplest sentences. On the camera, the crowd finally started moving. Not all at once, in pieces. People who had cars climbed in fast. People without cars looked lost for a minute, then followed. The woman with the child got pulled along by another woman who kept one arm around her shoulders. The cutters disappeared behind the van. The lower lot emptied gradually, and the gate area became quieter. The armed team outside kept their posture until the last car backed out. Then they stood there, scanning the road, not relaxed, not panic-head, just waiting for whatever came next. Inside my headphones, the world kept breaking. I heard public emergency nets in multiple languages talking about rolling blackouts, water pressure, fuel rationing, and curfews. I heard air traffic control-style messages telling civilian aircraft to divert or land immediately. I heard a clipped announcement in English that sounded official, stating that certain air corridors were closed due to hostile activity. That phrase is what you say when you cannot hide the truth anymore, but you still want to keep people calm. I also heard something that made my skin go cold because it touched the edge of the unthinkable. A readiness posture message, heavy with checklist language, and then a separate message warning about misidentification risks due to spoofing. When those two things exist at the same time, the danger is not only weapons. The danger is decision time shrinking while information quality collapses. The armed man behind me leaned closer and said quietly that a major European exchange point had gone down, and that payment systems were failing in multiple regions. He did not give a name. He did not need to. I had already seen it in the civilian traffic. People swearing that their cards did not work, people lining up at bank machines, people trying to buy fuel with cash and getting refused because the station could not make change. I said on the air carefully that electronic payments might not work consistently and that people should carry some cash if they have it, and more importantly, they should not start fights at fuel stations or stores because a broken jaw does not become less broken when the hospital is on generator. The armed man did not stop me. That told me he understood the difference between tactical information and survival reality. Then the uplink chain took another hit. The audio in my headphones surged with static and then cut. The monitoring computer threw an error. The spectrum monitor showed a broad spike that looked deliberate. The man down the corridor shouted that someone was stepping on the uplink hard, and it was not random. One of the armed team members ran into the studio area and said something that made the room feel smaller. He said there were reports of drones over key infrastructure in central Italy, not hobby drones, and that some had been used to drop small munitions or to mark targets for other strikes. He said they did not know if any were in this valley yet. He said the safest move might be to go fully dark. The leader looked at me and then at the equipment. You could see him weighing it. Keep transmitting and risk becoming a beacon, or go dark and leave civilians to rumor. He did not get to choose a good option, only a less bad one. He told his team to prepare the building for a full shutdown. He told them to keep internal power, but kill external emissions. He told me I had 1 more minute to say what mattered to civilians, and then the mic was done. I used that minute in the simplest way I could. I told people to stay indoors tonight if they can. I told them to keep water, keep a flashlight, keep a charged phone, and to avoid travel toward towers, facilities, and main junctions. I told them if they hear aircraft or impacts, stay away from windows and do not rush outside to film. I told them to check on neighbors quietly, especially elderly, without forming crowds. I told them that rumors would be everywhere, and the best defense is calm routines. Then the leader cut the route. The mic went dead. The small meter on my mixer stopped bouncing. For the first time all day, the studio felt truly silent. I sat there with my hands on the desk, staring at equipment that still had power but no outward voice, and I realized something else. Even if my broadcast was over, the facility was now part of the war, whether I wanted it or not. The crowd had seen it. The armed team had taken control of it, and somewhere out there, someone was interfering with our link on purpose, which meant someone knew we existed. The leader told me I would stay inside under their supervision until they could move me safely. He said roads were becoming unpredictable, and there were reports of looting and vehicle checkpoints forming without clear authority. He said some were police, some were soldiers, some were just men with guns and reflective vests pretending. He also said bluntly that if the building was targeted, nobody was coming to rescue us. He said their orders were to secure sensitive equipment and prevent it from being used by hostile actors. Human comfort was not on the list. He did not sound cruel, he sounded honest. That is where my day turned into a long night inside a cold technical building with armed men in the corridor, a generator that might or might not last, and a world outside that was losing the last shared rules. I had wanted to be a voice in chaos. Now I was just another person trapped inside it, listening to distant sirens, watching the monitors flicker, and waiting for the next decision that would cost something no matter what I chose.